Hey everyone, Midas here. A few months ago, I made a video that longtime viewers of my channel most likely remember. The video was the first part of a two-parter series where I reviewed every Spider-Man show I had viewed at that moment. Now, the majority of my sentiments in that video still stand, but there is one point in the video I do regret making, and that is how poorly I talked about Spider-Man Unlimited, calling it the worst Spider-Man show. I feel that, over time, my opinions on the show have evolved, and that statement is no longer accurate. And also, another thing I obviously have to mention, and this is a spoiler warning for the Across the Spider-Verse movie, although this is shown in the trailer, we know that Spider-Man Unlimited is going to be in the movie, so it's a great time to revisit this iteration of the Wall Crawler. Anyway, let us begin discussing how I was wrong about Spider-Man Unlimited. If you missed the previous video and also have not seen Spider-Man Unlimited, I will explain the series' premise. The story begins with John Jameson heading to a planet on the opposite side of the solar system called Counter-Earth. As Peter is taking photos of the ship taking off, he discovers Venom and Carnage are trying to board the spaceship. Spider-Man fails at stopping them, and everyone blames him for the disappearance of John Jameson, as his signal was lost when he went to space. After this, Peter creates the Unlimited suit, and on a ship, which is going to go and try to find Jameson, Spidey gets on board and heads to Counter-Earth along with Peter Parker. And yes, I know that sounds weird, we're going to talk about it later. The rest of this series follows Spider-Man in Counter-Earth, a planet where creatures called Bestials seize control of the entire planet. In this show, Spider-Man fights against the main villain, the High Evolutionary, along with Jameson and other rebels on the planet. Venom and Carnage are also on Counter-Earth, creating problems as well. You've probably noticed this already, but this show is very different compared to the other Spider-Man shows we've talked about. And there's actually a pretty good reason for why that is. When Spider-Man Unlimited was under production, the producers of the show wanted to make a story about Peter traveling to an alternate Earth with an alternate evil Peter Parker. But because of the Clone Saga controversy, they decided it was a poor idea to create a show about numerous Spider-Men. After that, they thought about making a Spider-Man 2099 show, but Batman Beyond by that point had released, and they didn't want to look like they were copying that show. And that is how we ended up with the show we have now. That's all the backstory for the show you need to know. Now let's talk about some of the notable things this series does. Some of which are great, and others not so much. First of all, I want to say that the concept of Spider-Man Unlimited, while it is weird, it is a nice change of pace seeing a more original idea for a Spider-Man show instead of continuing to do the same thing as they always did. Not that that was bad or anything, but it is cool that they deviated from the regular Spider-Man formula. And also, I definitely think that Rino Romano is a great Spider-Man in this show. While there are some things about his character, which I am going to talk about later, that aren't the best, those are 100% the faults of the writers and not with Reno himself. And also, he plays Spider-Man in the two Neversoft games, and he does a great job there too. So yeah, he's a great Spider-Man. Now, there are some concepts in this show which are really compelling that I want to talk about. For example, it's really fascinating that they had the High Evolutionary as the central villain of the show, since he's not typically a Spider-Man villain. And another thing that's really interesting is how they have alternate versions of classic Spider-Man villains. For example, on Counter-Earth, there's alternate versions of Vulture, Electro, Kraven, and Green Goblin. All of these alternate versions are just completely different from the original counterparts with no similarities whatsoever, and that is, really interesting that they went with that route. And while I have been talking about a bunch of the great parts of the show, there are still some problems I have with it. First of all, this isn't really a crucial problem, but rather a minor nitpick. How is Peter going to explain himself when he returns from Counter-Earth? Like I said earlier, Spider-Man said that he and Peter were heading to Counter-Earth. The two of them. But if they came back from Counter-Earth, only one of them would leave the ship. So what would the plan there even be? You know what? It's not that big of a deal. Let us get into some things that do matter. One of the most prominent issues of the show is Peter's characterization. When he arrives at Counter-Earth, he wants to locate and return Jameson. And when he finds out about everything that is happening on Counter-Earth, he could not care less. Even throughout the remainder of the series, he is only there fighting the High Evolutionary because John Jameson refuses to leave until he is defeated. This is extremely out of character for Peter. Peter would definitely never do this, and it just feels really odd that the writers of the show decided to do that. Another thing that's unfortunate is how the show ended. Like a bunch of other shows, it unfortunately only lasted one season of 13 episodes and finished on a ginormous cliffhanger. That's it for all of my issues with the show, and as you can tell, I don't really have that many issues. In that case, why was I so critical of it in my initial review? I think the most important thing to note to answer that question is the show which came right before that, Spider-Man the Animated Series, also known as the best Spider-Man show ever made. Unlimited had big shoes to fill that, while I do view the show more positively, could not live up to Taz, even now. But now that I see Spider-Man Unlimited completely separate from the animated series, I realize that while it did have some bizarre things that did not make sense, the show was still fascinating. I definitely feel like it should have had that second season. In conclusion, I was wrong, and Spider-Man Unlimited is pretty good. That is going to be it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did enjoy this video and want to see more content like this, check out this video on screen where I review another Spider-Man series. And I'll see you all in the next one.